The attorney's pen stopped moving above the page. The kind of stop that isn't hesitation, it's recognition. The half-second pause a man makes when he reads a name he was not expecting to read out loud. And Genevieve's mother let out a small laugh from the head of the table. A laugh that was not directed at the attorney, but at me, the way her laughs had been directed at me for 18 years. With the particular efficiency of a woman who had perfected the art of laughing at a person while pretending the laughter was about something else entirely. "Go on, Mr. Calloway," she said. "Read it." The attorney looked up from the document. He looked at me. Not at Genevieve, not at her mother Adelaide, not at her brother Thatcher, who was already calculating his portion of the Whitfield estate in the visible muscle movements of his jaw. He looked at me. "Mr. Hartman," he said, "this concerns you." "That's a first," Thatcher said, and Adelaide laughed again. We were in a conference room on Broad Street in Charleston, South Carolina, on the third floor of the Calloway and Pemberton law offices, a building that had been processing the wills of Charleston's first families for 147 years. The mahogany table in the center of the room had been hand-carved in 1923. The portrait on the wall was of Adelaide's grandfather, Beaumont Whitfield, who founded Whitfield Shipping in 1908. The chair I was sitting in had been positioned, at Adelaide's instruction, slightly outside the circle of family chairs, an inch and a half closer to the wall than the rest, a distance small enough to deny and large enough to communicate. I had married Genevieve Whitfield in 2008. I had been the poor son-in-law for 18 years, and I was about to find out why. My name, the name I had carried for 41 years, was Wesley Hartman. Hartman, the surname of my mother, Eloise Hartman, a piano teacher from Asheville, North Carolina, who raised me alone in a two-bedroom apartment above a bakery on Patna Avenue, and who died of pancreatic cancer in 2019 without ever telling me the name of the man who fathered me. She had told me over the course of 32 years exactly 3 things about my biological father. He was older. He was already married. He could not be a father to me, and we were not to look for him ever under any circumstances because he had made it clear that the looking would be unwelcome. I had honored her wishes. I had not looked. I had built a life that did not require him. I went to community college, became a high school history teacher, met Genevieve at a friend's wedding in 2007, married her in 2008, and walked into the Whitfield family with the open, naive belief that love would translate, that the wealth gap between us would be a topic the family would handle with grace, that the 18 years ahead of me would be a slow ascent into acceptance. It was not. The first Thanksgiving, Adelaide introduced me to her sister as Genevieve's project. At the second Christmas, Thatcher asked me, in front of 14 relatives, what my actual income was, the word actual chosen with the precision of a man placing a knife. At every event for the next 16 years, I was the schoolteacher, the man Genevieve had picked up, the unfortunate mistake the family had decided to tolerate because Genevieve insisted, because love, because the inconvenient sentiment of a daughter who refused to marry the appropriate Charleston bachelor and married instead the orphan boy from Asheville with no last name worth mentioning. I had spent 18 years swallowing it. 18 years of being seated an inch and a half from the table. 18 years of corrections about which fork, which wine, which fork again, because the first correction hadn't humiliated me sufficiently the first time. 18 years of Adelaide telling her friends, in a voice pitched to Carrie, that Wesley teaches, dear, isn't that nice, the word nice doing the work of a small, surgical blade. And now the attorney was looking at me from across the mahogany table, and he had just said the words, "This concerns you," and the room was silent for the first time in 18 years. Beauregard Whitfield, Genevieve's father, had died 11 days earlier. Heart attack, 68 years old. He had been the only member of the Whitfield family who had ever spoken to me as if I were a man and not a stain, and his kindness had been the quiet kind, the kind that does not announce itself. The kind that you only fully understand is gone when the man who provided it is no longer in the room. Beauregard had built Whitfield Shipping into a regional operation worth approximately $86 million. His will was the document on the table. And the attorney, Mr. Calloway, was holding it in both hands now, the way a man holds something heavier than its physical weight. "Before I continue with the distribution," Calloway said, "there is a clause Mr. Whitfield included specifically to be read at this stage. He was very particular about the timing." "Particular how?" Adelaide said. "He asked that it be read in front of the entire family before any portion of the estate is discussed." "Then read it." Calloway adjusted his glasses. He looked at me one more time, the look of a professional who has read what is on the page and understands that the next 30 seconds will rearrange the furniture of every life in the room. "This clause concerns the identity of my son-in-law, Wesley Hartman. Adelaide laughed again, a short, brittle sound. His identity? Yes, ma'am. He's a schoolteacher from Asheville. That's his identity. Calloway did not respond to her. He looked back down at the document and he began to read, and the first words he read were not the words anyone in the room expected to hear, least of all me. It has come to my attention, through a process I will describe in this document, that my son-in-law, Wesley Hartman, is the biological son of my late business partner and closest friend, Cornelius Ashford Bellamy. The room did not react. Not yet. The information was too large, the name too specific, the implications too far-reaching for any of the four people sitting at that table to process in the half-second between the words leaving Calloway's mouth and the silence that followed them. I heard Adelaide's breathing change. I heard Thatcher set down the pen he had been holding. I heard Genevieve beside me make a small sound, not a word, just the soft intake of air that a person makes when the floor of a familiar room shifts beneath her feet. Cornelius Bellamy. I knew the name. Every Charleston resident over the age of 30 knew the name. Cornelius Bellamy had owned Bellamy Holdings, a private investment firm that controlled real estate, shipping, and hospitality assets across the southeastern United States, an empire valued at the time of his death in 2022 at approximately $440 million. His funeral had been attended by 2 former governors, 3 senators, and the mayor of Charleston. His estate had been the subject of speculation for 3 years because no public heir had been named, and the assets had been held in a trust whose beneficiary the local press had been unable to identify. "This is a joke," Adelaide said. Her voice had lost the brittle, performative quality it carried at family events. It had become flat, the voice of a woman who is no longer performing because performance has become impossible. "Beau would not put a joke in his will." "It is not a joke," Calloway said. "Then explain it." "I can read the document if you'll permit me, Mrs. Whitfield," Calloway continued. The words came slowly, the cadence of a man reading something he had read in private many times before, the cadence of a man who understood that this reading was the one that mattered. "Cornelius confided in me in March of 2017, 3 weeks before he received his cancer diagnosis, that he had fathered a child in 1984 with a woman named Wesley Hartman of Asheville, North Carolina. He told me the relationship had ended before the pregnancy was disclosed, that Alois had refused his financial assistance, that she had asked only for his absence, and that he had honored her wish for 33 years. He told me he had watched the child from a distance, through private inquiries, and that the child had grown into a young man named Wesley who had become a high school history teacher, and had in 2007 married a young woman named Genevieve Whitfield, the daughter of his business partner. The pen Thatcher had set down rolled. It rolled along the mahogany table in the tiny gradient of an old building's settled floor, and the sound it made, a small wooden vibration, was the only sound in the room for the duration of its movement. Cornelius told me that he had watched his son enter our family without recognition, that he had attended 2 charity galas at which Wesley was present and had not approached him, that he had refused on 3 separate occasions to disclose his paternity, because Alois had asked for absence and absence was the only gift he had ever been permitted to give her. He told me he was dying and that he had drafted his own will, leaving the entirety of his estate to a trust whose beneficiary was Wesley Hartman, to be released to him upon the death of either Cornelius or the death of Beauregard Whitfield, whichever came second, so that the disclosure would occur within a family context and not in the public press. Calloway paused. He turned the page. "Cornelius asked me to confirm Wesley's paternity through a DNA comparison, which I arranged through a discreet laboratory using a sample obtained from a coffee cup Wesley discarded at the 2017 Christmas gala. The comparison was conclusive. Wesley Hartman is the biological son of Cornelius Ashford Bellamy." Adelaide stood up, not gracefully. She stood up the way a person stands up when the chair has become physically unbearable, when the act of sitting has become an act of submission to information she cannot accept. "Sit down, Mother," Genevieve said. Her voice was quiet, but the room heard it. "Genevieve, this is preposterous." "Sit down." Adelaide sat. The brittle laugh she had launched 10 minutes earlier had vanished entirely, and what remained was the face of a woman whose entire architecture of contempt had just been revealed to have been built on a foundation she could not have imagined and would now have to inhabit. Calloway looked at me. The look was professional, but it had something else in it. The look of a man delivering news he had been carrying for 9 years and was finally permitted to set down. Mr. Hartman, he said, I have a separate envelope from Mr. Bellamy's estate that is to be delivered to you today. The trust is now legally activated. As of this moment, you are the sole beneficiary of an estate valued at approximately $440 million. I did not move. I did not speak. I sat in the chair that had been positioned an inch and a half from the family circle, the chair Adelaide had assigned me at every gathering for 18 years, and I felt the geometry of the room reorganize itself around me without my body shifting at all. The inch and a half was still there. The mahogany table was still there. The portrait of Beaumont Whitfield was still on the wall. But the meaning of every object in the room had changed, and the change was not something I had done. The change was something that had been done to me 18 years earlier and was only now being disclosed. $440 million, Thatcher said. He repeated the number like a man testing a sentence in a language he was just beginning to learn. 440. Approximately, Calloway said. The trust holds a diversified portfolio. The exact valuation as of last quarter was $443.7 million. There may be fluctuation. Fluctuation, Thatcher said. Adelaide was looking at the table. Not at me, not at Calloway, not at the document, at the table itself, the surface of the mahogany, as if the wood grain might rearrange into a different version of the last 10 minutes if she stared at it with sufficient intensity. Her hands were folded in her lap. The hands were not still. The hands were trembling in the particular way that older hands tremble when a younger version of the same hands has just been shown to have made a catastrophic 18-year-long error of judgment. Genevieve's hand found mine under the table, not for show. She did it without looking at me, the way she had held my hand at her father's funeral, the way she had held it during every dinner her mother had spent correcting my fork. The hand was warm. It said the only thing it was capable of saying in that moment, which was, I am here, and the words I had not known were the only words I needed to hear, I heard. Mr. Hartman, Calloway said, I have a letter from Cornelius. He asked me to deliver it to you personally at the moment of disclosure. Would you prefer to read it in private or in this room? I looked up. I looked at Adelaide first, then at Thatcher, then at the inch and a half of space between my chair and the chair to my left. I'll read it here, I said. Calloway handed me an envelope. Cream-colored, heavy stock, sealed with red wax, my name written on the front in a handwriting I had never seen, but which my hands recognized in some pre-rational way that I could not have explained. The handwriting was angled slightly to the right, the W in Wesley made with a particular flourish on the descending stroke, and I knew before I broke the wax that my own handwriting had the same flourish, the same angle, the same small curl at the bottom of every W, and that I had inherited this from a man whose face I had never seen and whose voice I would never hear. I broke the wax. I unfolded the letter. I read it. Wesley, if you are reading this, then I am gone and Beauregard is gone, and the silence I promised your mother in 1984 has finally expired with the parties to whom it was owed. I am sorry. Those are the first words, and they should be the last, because no other words can do the work that those two words must do. Your mother asked me for absence, and I gave it to her, because I loved her more than I loved my own desire to know my son. I have wondered for 40 years whether absence was love or cowardice. I have decided at the end that it was both, and that the proportion does not matter because the outcome was the same. You grew up without me. I grew old without you. We both lost. I watched you, Wesley, from a distance. I attended 2 events at which you were present and did not approach you. I read your mother's obituary in 2019 and did not attend the funeral because she had asked me for absence and her death did not release me from that promise. I am releasing myself from it now posthumously because the alternative is to die without ever telling you that I knew you existed, and I knew you mattered, and I knew every day for 41 years that you were my son. I leave you everything, not because the money matters. The money does not matter. I leave you everything because it is the only language I have left, and because I want the family that has spent 18 years measuring you by the wrong yardstick to learn in the most public way possible that the yardstick was always wrong. Forgive me for the absence. Use the inheritance however you wish. Your father, Cornelius, I folded the letter. I placed it on the table. I did not cry. The crying would come later, in private, in the car, in the hours of the night when the body finally permits the grief that the daylight will not allow. In this room, with these people, I did something else. I looked up at Adelaide Whitfield, and I looked at her for a length of time that exceeded what any of the previous 18 years had permitted, and I let her look back. Adelaide held my gaze for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds, the same length of time Cornelius Bellamy had apparently held a hand he was not permitted to hold, the same length that, I would later learn fathers and sons measure in small, stolen units when the larger units have been denied to them. 4 seconds was all Adelaide could manage before her eyes dropped to the table. Not in apology, in recalculation. The eyes of a woman who had spent 18 years constructing a hierarchy and was now being forced in real time to dismantle it without the privacy of a back room. "Wesley," she said. The word was strange in her mouth. She had not used my first name, my actual first name, more than a dozen times in 18 years. She had preferred Genevieve's husband, or dear, or the impersonal third person she deployed when speaking about me to other people in my presence. "Wesley, I think we should all take a moment to—" "No," I said. The word was quiet. I did not raise my voice. I had spent 18 years not raising my voice in this family, 18 years of swallowing corrections and tolerating laughter, and the habit of restraint did not break in the conference room. It bent. It bent into a single syllable that contained inside it the entire weight of the 18 years, and the syllable was sufficient. "No," Adelaide said. "No, we are not going to take a moment. Mr. Calloway has not finished reading my father-in-law's will. I would like him to finish." I had used the words "my father-in-law" deliberately. Beauregard had been my father-in-law. Beauregard had been kind. Beauregard had known, apparently for years, who I was, and had said nothing, because Cornelius had asked him to say nothing, and the saying had been preserved for this moment. The will Calloway was reading was Beauregard's final act of friendship to a dead man, and I wanted the act completed in the room in front of the family with the witnesses who needed to be present. Calloway nodded. He looked grateful. The look of a man who had been worried I would ask for privacy, which would have permitted Adelaide and Thatcher to compose themselves outside the room before the next blow landed. "Thank you, Mr. Hartman," he said. He turned the page. He continued. "In light of the disclosure regarding Wesley's paternity, and in recognition of the manner in which my wife Adelaide and my son Thatcher have conducted themselves toward Wesley over the duration of his marriage to my daughter Genevieve, I have amended my own estate distribution as follows." Adelaide's head came up. She had not been expecting this. None of us had been expecting this. The Bellamy inheritance had absorbed the room's attention so completely that no one, not Adelaide, not Thatcher, not me, had remembered that the document Calloway was reading was Beauregard's will, and that Beauregard's will had not yet been distributed. "To my wife Adelaide Whitfield, I leave the Charleston residence on Trad Street, valued at approximately $2.1 million, and an annuity of $75,000 per annum for the duration of her natural life. This represents a reduction from my prior testamentary intent. The reduction is deliberate. Adelaide, you will read in the supplementary letter I have left for you the reason for this reduction. The reason concerns the treatment of Wesley." Adelaide's mouth opened. No sound came out. "To my son Thatcher Whitfield, I leave the sum of $500,000 and no interest in Whitfield shipping. Thatcher, you will read in the supplementary letter the reason for this exclusion. The reason concerns the treatment of Wesley, and the conversation I overheard between you and your mother on the patio at the 2023 Easter gathering regarding what you referred to as the schoolteacher problem." Thatcher made a sound. The sound was not a word. The sound was the involuntary exhalation a man makes when he is reminded, on the public record, of a private conversation he had assumed was unwitnessed. "To my daughter Genevieve Whitfield Hartman, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including my controlling interest in Whitfield shipping, valued at approximately $83 million, the Sullivan's Island property, valued at approximately $4.8 million, and the residual assets of my personal investment portfolio. Genevieve, you have loved Wesley publicly and privately and without correction for 18 years. You loved him before you knew who his father was. You loved him when your mother and brother did not. That love is the asset I most want to protect, and the protection takes the form of placing the family's resources in the hands of the person most likely to use them with kindness." Calloway set the document down. He folded his hands on top of it. "That is the substance of Mr. Whitfield's will," he said. "The supplementary letters to Mrs. Whitfield and Mr. Thatcher Whitfield are in my office and may be collected at their convenience. The Bellamy Trust documentation will be transmitted to Mr. Hartman within the week." Adelaide was crying, silently. The crying of a woman who has just understood that her husband, the man she had been married to for 43 years, had been watching her for the duration of those 4 decades with greater attention than she had ever credited him with, and had concluded at the end that her conduct toward me had been disqualifying. Thatcher stood up. He did not say excuse me. He did not say goodbye to his mother. He walked out of the conference room with the particular gait of a man whose body is moving on autopilot because the conscious portion of his brain has shut down to process losses too numerous to enumerate in the time available. The door closed behind him with a soft click, the kind of click that mahogany doors make in old Charleston law offices, doors that were hung in 1923 and have been closing softly behind shaken people for 100 years. Adelaide did not stand. She remained in her chair, hands folded, tears moving down her face without being acknowledged, the way the tears of women of her generation move, without permission, without commentary, without the indignity of being wiped away in public. She was staring at the document in front of Calloway. I do not think she was reading it. I think she was looking at the fact of it, the physical evidence that her husband had been keeping a private ledger on her conduct, and the ledger had been balanced, and the balance had not favored her. "Mr. Calloway," I said, "thank you. I would like to speak with my wife privately. Is there a room?" "The room across the hall is available." Genevieve and I stood. We left the conference room. We crossed the hallway. We entered a smaller room with a small round table and 2 chairs and a window overlooking Broad Street. I closed the door. I sat. Genevieve sat across from me. She had not let go of my hand. She had not let go of it since the moment Calloway had spoken the name Cornelius Bellamy, and she did not let go of it now, even as we sat on opposite sides of the small table, even as the geometry of the chairs would have permitted release. "Wesley," she said. "Yeah, I didn't know. I know you didn't. I want to say that again. I didn't know. My father didn't tell me. I had no idea who your biological father was. I married you because I loved you. I want that to be true in this moment. I need it to be true in this moment." I looked at her. I had been looking at her for 19 years, since the wedding in 2007, where she sat at table 14, and I sat at table 22, and the bride had moved us together at the reception because she had noticed her cousin Genevieve looking at the history teacher from Asheville with the expression of a woman who was about to make her mother very unhappy. I had loved her at table 22. I had loved her through 18 years of her mother's corrections. I had loved her through the inch and a half of distance at every family dinner. And I loved her now in this small room on Broad Street with the new information sitting between us, the kind of information that has the capacity to corrupt a marriage if it is allowed to. "Genevieve," I said, "I have never doubted that you loved me. I do not doubt it now. The Bellamy inheritance does not change what was true about us before the inheritance. It only changes what is possible after." She closed her eyes. She squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what? For my mother, for Thatcher, for every dinner where I didn't say anything, for every correction I let her make. For every Christmas I sat across from you and watched her treat you like a stain and told myself it would get better if I just kept loving you visibly, as if visibility were a substitute for confrontation. It wasn't. It was never going to be. I should have stopped her. I should have stopped her the first Thanksgiving. I should have stopped her every Thanksgiving for 18 years, and I didn't, and I am sorry." I looked at our hands. Her hand inside mine, the gold band on her ring finger, the small scar on my right thumb from a kitchen accident in 2014 that she had bandaged for me at 2 in the morning while I joked that the cut was the only inheritance I would ever receive from my hardware store apartment days. The scar was still there. The marriage was still there. The 18 years had not been a fiction. The 18 years had been a marriage conducted inside a family that did not deserve the marriage, and the marriage had survived anyway because Genevieve had refused, quietly and privately and at considerable personal cost, to participate in her mother's surveillance of me. "You didn't stop her," I said, "but you didn't join her either. That distinction is the reason we're still married. That distinction is the reason your fathers will read the way it just read." Beauregard saw it. He saw what you did, and he saw what you didn't do, and he balanced the difference in your favor. Genevieve cried then, not the silent, dignified crying of her mother across the hall. The other kind. The kind that comes out of a person who has been holding something for 19 years and is finally permitted to put it down. She cried into our joined hands, and I let her. I had spent 18 years swallowing my own crying in this family. She had spent the same 18 years swallowing hers. We were going to let the crying happen now in this small room with the door closed, with no one keeping score except the 2 of us. We sat in the small room for 40 minutes. I did not check my watch. Genevieve did not check hers. The light through the Broad Street window moved from the high angle of early afternoon to the lower angle of late afternoon, and the small round table between us caught the light in a different way than it had when we sat down. And that was how we measured the time, by the slow rotation of the sun over a city that had been keeping its own time for 350 years. When we left the small room, the conference room across the hall was empty. Adelaide was gone. Calloway met us in the hallway, his briefcase in hand, his coat over his arm. He had waited. "Mr. Hartman," he said. "Mrs. Hartman, I have something else for you." He handed me a second envelope. Smaller, plain white, no wax seal. My name was written on it in a different handwriting from the letter in the conference room. A handwriting I recognized this time, Beauregard's handwriting. The careful, slanted script I had seen on birthday cards, on the small notes he tucked into Christmas gifts, on the inscription in the leather-bound history of Charleston shipping he had given me on my 40th birthday with the words for Wesley, who knows that history is the only thing that lasts. "Mr. Whitfield left this for you separately," Calloway said. "He asked that I deliver it after the will reading. He did not want it read in the conference room. He wanted it read in private." I took the envelope. I thanked Calloway. He nodded, a small nod, the nod of a professional who has discharged a duty he had been carrying for years. He walked down the hallway toward the elevators, and Genevieve and I stood in the corridor of the third floor of the Calloway and Pemberton offices, and I opened the second envelope. "Wesley, I have known since 2018. Cornelius came to me in March of 2018, a year after he had confided in his attorney, and he told me what he had told no one else for 34 years, that the son of Wesley Hartman, the boy he had watched from a distance, the boy who had grown into the man who had married my daughter, was his son. He told me because he was dying, and because he wanted at least one member of your family of the heart to know, even if you could not yet know yourself. I want to be honest with you, Wesley. I did not handle the disclosure perfectly. My first instinct when Cornelius told me was relief, because the discovery explained a thing I had been quietly observing about you for 10 years. You carried yourself like a Bellamy. You did not know it, but you did. The straight back, the way you listened before you spoke, the particular quiet you held in rooms where Adelaide was being unkind to you, the quiet that was not weakness but discipline. I had watched Cornelius hold the same quiet in board meetings for 4 decades, and I had never been able to identify where the resemblance came from. When he told me, I understood. The resemblance came from him. My second instinct was anger, not at Cornelius, at myself, because I had watched my wife and my son treat you like a stain for 10 years, and I had not stopped them. I had been kind to you in private, at the edges, in the small ways that kindness expresses itself when the surrounding family does not permit larger expressions. I had told myself that small kindness was enough. It was not. I knew it then. I know it now. My third instinct was to act. I rewrote my will the week after Cornelius told me. The version Calloway read today is the version I drafted in April of 2018, refined twice in the years since, and finalized last spring after the Easter conversation between Adelaide and Thatcher that I overheard from the patio. Thatcher used a phrase that morning, the schoolteacher problem, and I stood on the patio with a glass of bourbon in my hand, and I listened to my son describe his sister's husband as a problem. And I knew at that moment that the will I had drafted in 2018 was correct, and that I would not be amending it again. Wesley, I have one request. Cornelius's estate is large enough that you will not need anything from the Whitfield estate. I gave the Whitfield estate to Genevieve because Genevieve earned it, but the controlling interest in Whitfield shipping is mine to direct, and I have directed it to my daughter, who will direct it through her marriage, which means it will be directed in practice through both of you. I would like you to be involved in the company, not because you need to be, because I believe you will be good at it. You taught high school history for 15 years. You taught teenagers about Reconstruction and the Marshall Plan and the rise of organized labor, and you did it on a salary that would have insulted any of my board members, and you did it because the work mattered to you. The work at Whitfield Shipping matters too. The people who load the cargo, the people who pilot the tugs, the people who file the manifests, they have lives that depend on the company being run by someone who remembers that companies are made of people. Adelaide forgot. Thatcher never knew. You will remember because you taught teenagers, and teenagers are the truest stress test of whether a person remembers that work is about people. I am proud of my daughter. I am proud of you. I am sorry I did not say it earlier. I am saying it now. Beauregard, I folded the letter. I looked at Genevieve. She had read it over my shoulder. Her eyes were wet again, but she was smiling, the particular smile of a daughter who has just learned that her father saw her marriage clearly, valued it correctly, and protected it deliberately. Your dad, I said. Yeah. He knew for 8 years. He knew, and he never said anything to me. He couldn't. Cornelius asked him not to, but he changed his will. That was his way of saying. I put the letter in my inside jacket pocket. I held it against my chest through the fabric. Let's go home, I said. We took the elevator down. We walked out into the Charleston afternoon. The light was the particular October light that turns the pastel buildings of Broad Street into something out of a painting that has not been signed yet. Adelaide called the next morning at 7:14. I was in the kitchen of the small house on Wentworth Street that Genevieve and I had bought in 2012 with the down payment her father had quietly provided and that her mother had publicly mocked for its proximity to a college bar. I was making coffee. Genevieve was still asleep upstairs. The phone vibrated on the counter, and Adelaide's name appeared on the screen, and I looked at the name for a length of time that allowed the coffee to begin to overfill the cup before I noticed and turned off the pour. I let it ring through. I let it go to voicemail. I cleaned the coffee from the counter. I sat at the kitchen table with the cup and the morning paper, which I had not yet opened, and I waited for the voicemail to deliver itself. The way you wait for a piece of mail you know contains bad news. The way you wait for the moment of acknowledgement that the bad news exists before you read its contents. The voicemail icon appeared. I tapped it. I listened. "Wesley, this is Adelaide. I am calling at 7 in the morning because I have not slept. I would like to speak with you. I would prefer to do it in person. I am at the Trad Street house. Please come when you are able. I understand if you do not wish to come. I would not blame you, but I am asking." The voice was different. It was not the voice she had used at the will reading. It was not the voice she had used for 18 years. It was the voice of a woman who had spent the night sitting in a house that was now, by the terms of her husband's will, the only significant asset she would own outright, and who had used the hours of that night to reconsider, line by line, the 18 years that had produced the morning she was now living through. I deleted the voicemail. I sipped my coffee. I read the front page of the paper, an article about flooding in the Charleston Low Country, which had become a permanent feature of low country life, and was now reported in the paper the way weather is reported, as the recurring condition of the place rather than the exceptional event. I finished the cup. I poured a second. I sat with the second cup for 12 minutes, and then I called Genevieve down from upstairs because the decision I needed to make was a decision I would not make alone. She came down in her robe. Her hair was the way it gets in the morning, the curl on the left side flattened from the pillow, the curl on the right untouched, the asymmetry I had loved for 19 years. She poured her own coffee. She sat across from me. "Your mother called, and she wants me to come to the house." She said she didn't sleep. Genevieve looked into her cup. She held it with both hands the way she always did, the small ceremony of the morning that she had brought into the marriage from her own mother, one of the few habits Adelaide had successfully transmitted across the generations. "Do you want to go?" "I don't know. What does not knowing feel like?" "It feels like the right answer is to not go." To let her sit with what she did for 18 years and not extend her the relief of a conversation she did not earn. And the also right answer is to go, because if I don't, I'll have spent the rest of my life knowing I was offered the chance to face her and I declined, and the declining will become its own form of being shaped by her, the same as the 18 years of swallowing was a form of being shaped by her. Either way, she shapes me. The question is which shape I prefer. Genevieve nodded slowly. "Go," she said. "Why?" "Because the only shape worse than the one she gave you for 18 years is the shape you would give yourself by refusing to face her. You spent 18 years being small in her house because she insisted on it. You don't have to be small there anymore. Go, be the size you actually are. Let her see you at full size in her living room in the chairs she used to seat you 1.5 inches away from. Let her sit with what that looks like." I looked at my wife. She had inherited $88 million yesterday. Her hair was flat on one side. She was telling me to go face her mother because she understood, with the precision of a woman who had spent her entire life inside the Whitfield family, that the only way out of the family's pattern was through the family's living room. I drove to Trad Street at 9. The house was a single-family Charleston single, 3 stories with the long piazza on the south side, the kind of house that Charleston tourists photograph and the people who live in them maintain at considerable expense. Adelaide opened the door herself. No housekeeper. The housekeeper, I would later learn, had been let go that morning at 6 because Adelaide had recalculated her monthly expenses against the $75,000 annuity and concluded that the housekeeper was no longer affordable. "Wesley," she said, "thank you for coming." She led me into the front parlor, the room I had sat in 14 times over 18 years. The wing chair by the fireplace, the chair she had always seated me in, the chair that faced away from the window and toward the wall with the portrait of her father. I did not sit in the wing chair. I walked past it. I sat in the wing chair across from it, the chair Beauregard had always occupied, the chair that faced the window and the light. Adelaide noticed. She did not comment. She sat in the chair I had always been assigned. The seating had reversed itself, and neither of us said a word about it, and the silence between the two chairs was the loudest sound that had ever been in that parlor. She had prepared tea. The tea service was on the small table between the chairs, the silver pot her mother had brought from Savannah in 1952, the 2 cups, the small pitcher of cream, the bowl of sugar with the small silver spoon, the entire ritual she had performed for 43 years of marriage and would continue performing now even though the woman pouring the tea had become, overnight, a different woman than the one who had prepared the service. She poured. Her hand was steady. The hand of a woman who had been raised to pour tea steadily under conditions that included her own emotional collapse, because the pouring was a discipline, and the discipline was the thing that distinguished her family from the families she did not consider equivalent. "I want to apologize," she said. "All right. I do not know how to do it well. I have not had practice. I want to acknowledge that at the outset because I will likely do it poorly, and I would prefer to be corrected during rather than after." "All right." She set the pot down. She did not pick up her own cup. She looked at me across the small table, and for the second time in 2 days, she held my gaze for a length of time that exceeded what the previous 18 years had permitted. "I treated you badly for 18 years. Yes. I treated you badly because I had decided before I met you that no man my daughter married who was not from a Charleston family of appropriate standing would be acceptable to me. I decided this when Genevieve was 16 years old, and I held to the decision for the next 15 years. And when she presented you to me in 2008, I activated the decision against you, and I treated you accordingly. The treatment was not about you. It was about a position I had committed to before I knew you. I am explaining this not to excuse it. I am explaining it because I want you to understand that the cruelty was systematic, not personal, and that the systematic nature of it is, in some ways, worse than personal cruelty, because personal cruelty at least credits the target with being seen. I did not see you, Wesley. I treated you according to a template, and the template did not include the actual man sitting in my front parlor. I did not respond. I sipped the tea. Yesterday, I learned that the man I treated according to the template was the biological son of Cornelius Bellamy. Cornelius was at my wedding in 1983. He gave the toast. He was Beauregard's closest friend for 43 years. If you had been introduced to me in 2008 as the son of Cornelius Bellamy, I would have welcomed you. I would have seated you to my right at every dinner. I would have corrected my friends rather than my son-in-law. I would have made the 18 years a different 18 years, and the difference would not have been because you became a different man. The difference would have been because the template I was applying would have been a different template. She paused. She picked up her cup. She did not drink. She held it. "This is the part I cannot face, Wesley. The part where I understand that the cruelty was conditional on a piece of information I did not possess, and that the cruelty would have been absent if the information had been available. It means the cruelty was not about you, and it was not about me believing in a principle, and it was not even about Charleston standards. It was about a label. I treated a person badly for 18 years because the label on the person did not match the labels I had decided were acceptable. If the label had been different, I would have treated the same person differently. That is not snobbery. That is something smaller and uglier than snobbery. I do not have a word for it. I am not sure there is one." I set my cup down. "Adelaide," I said. It was the first time I had used her first name to her face in 18 years. She had always been Mrs. Whitfield, or once in 2014, ma'am, when she had asked me to pass the salt, and I had complied. The first name landed in the room with the weight it carried, and she heard the weight, and she did not flinch. "Yes, there is a word. The word is contempt. You held me in contempt because you had decided that the absence of a recognized surname disqualified me from full personhood inside your house. The Bellamy disclosure does not make the contempt better. It makes it worse because it reveals that your contempt was based on something so superficial that a single piece of information could reverse it. A genuine principle would survive new information. Your contempt did not survive new information. It evaporated the moment Calloway spoke a name. That is the diagnosis. The treatment is harder." She nodded. She was crying again, the same silent crying as yesterday. "I understand. I do not think you do. Let me say it more clearly. I am not refusing your apology. I am accepting it. I want you to hear that. I am accepting your apology because the apology is real, and the recognition behind the apology is real, and a person who recognizes what they did has done the harder part of the work. But the acceptance of an apology is not the restoration of a relationship. The relationship will not be restored by tea in the parlor. The relationship will be restored, if it is restored at all, by the next 10 years of conduct, conducted under conditions where I no longer need anything from you and you no longer have anything to gain from being cruel to me. Those conditions are new. We have never operated under those conditions. We will see what your conduct looks like when the conditions change. I will not predict the outcome. I will not promise the outcome. I will tell you what I am willing to do. I am willing to come to dinner. I am willing to sit in the chair Beauregard used to sit in, not the chair you used to assign me. I am willing to let Genevieve continue to be your daughter fully without making her choose between you and me. That is what I am offering. What you do with it is your part. Adelaide set her cup down. She nodded again. She did not speak. I finished my tea. I stood. I let myself out the front door, walked down the piazza steps, and got into my car. The Charleston morning had warmed. I drove home with the window down. 8 months passed. It is June of 2026. The Bellamy Trust has been transferred into my name through a process that required 4 months of paperwork, 3 meetings with a trust attorney in Atlanta named Hollis Pemberton, who had been Cornelius's personal counsel for 31 years, and 1 private dinner at the Bellamy estate on Sullivan's Island, a property I had driven past dozens of times in my life without knowing that the man who owned it shared half my chromosomes. The estate is a low country house, white clapboard, deep porches, a tin roof that turns silver in the afternoon light. Cornelius had built it in 1991 with the proceeds of his first major real estate transaction, and he had lived in it alone after his wife, Margaret, died of complications from surgery in 2009. There were no other children. There was no extended Bellamy family of consequence. There was a housekeeper, a man named Eugene who had worked for Cornelius for 26 years. And Eugene had stayed on through the 3 years between Cornelius's death and the activation of the trust, maintaining the house according to the precise standards Cornelius had set, because Hollis Pemberton had paid him to do so, and because, Eugene told me on my first visit, the house had become his house too in the way that houses become the houses of the people who care for them. Eugene met me at the front door on my first visit. He was 72 years old, a thin man with white hair cut close to the skull and the calm posture of a man who had spent 5 decades in service to people who valued discretion. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. The looking was not rude. The looking was the looking of a man who had watched Cornelius age, who had known about the son in Asheville for the last 6 years of Cornelius's life, who had been told to expect me eventually, and who was now, finally, seeing me in person and confirming for himself the resemblance Beauregard had identified at his patio in 2018. "Mr. Bellamy," he said. "Hartman, please, or Wesley, I haven't changed the name. Will you?" "I don't know yet." Eugene nodded, the small nod of a man who understood that the question of the name was not a question to be answered on a doorstep. And he led me into the house, and he showed me, room by room, the life Cornelius had built and maintained, the life I had been excluded from by my mother's wish and my father's compliance. There were photographs on the mantel in the study. I had expected the photographs to be of Cornelius and Margaret, of business partners, of the official record of a successful Charleston life. Most of them were. But on the right end of the mantel, in a small silver frame, was a photograph of a child, perhaps 4 years old, sitting on the front steps of a building I recognized as the Asheville Library, holding a book in his lap. The child was me. I had no memory of the photograph being taken. I had no memory of who had taken it. "He took it himself," Eugene said. He had been watching me look at it. "He drove to Asheville twice a year. He parked across the street from your school. He parked across the street from your apartment. He took photographs from a distance. He never approached. He never wrote. He kept the photographs in a drawer in this study, and after Mrs. Bellamy passed in 2009, he took the one of you on the library steps and put it on the mantel. It was the only photograph of you he displayed. He told me the first time I asked that the photograph was of his godson. He told me in 2017, after he received his diagnosis, that the photograph was of his son. He apologized for the lie. I told him no apology was necessary, that I had suspected for a long time, and that I had loved him for keeping the photograph regardless of the relationship he claimed. I looked at the photograph for a long time. The boy in it was 4 years old. The boy did not know his father was across the street with a camera. The boy was reading a book. The book, I could now see, was a children's history of the Roman Empire, a book my mother had given me for my 4th birthday and which had been the book that began my lifelong love of history, the love that had eventually become my career. The book had been her gift. The photograph had been his. Both gifts had shaped me. Neither had announced itself as a shaping. I left the photograph where it was. I left it on the mantel. I told Eugene that the house would remain as Cornelius had kept it. that he would continue to live in it as the caretaker, that his salary would be doubled, and that the only change I wished to make was the addition of a single shelf in the study where I would place, over the coming years, the photographs of my own life that Cornelius had not been permitted to take, the wedding photographs, the photographs from my mother's funeral, the small album from our honeymoon in Savannah in 2008. The two collections, the photographs he had taken without permission and the photographs I would now place beside them, would constitute a record neither of us had assembled alone, but which would, side by side on a mantel in a house on Sullivan's Island, finally exist together. I have not changed my name. Hollis Pemberton has prepared the paperwork. The paperwork sits in a folder on the desk in my study at the Wentworth Street house. I look at it every few weeks. I have not signed it. I am not sure I will. The name Hartman is my mother's name. My mother gave me the name. My mother raised me alone. My mother died without knowing that the man she had asked for absence had been quietly photographing our son for 32 years. The name Hartman is the record of her life. To replace it with Bellamy would be to participate in a posthumous transaction my mother did not authorize, and I am not yet willing to authorize it on her behalf. Hollis Pemberton has been patient. He has told me there is no deadline. He has told me that the trust does not require the name change, that Cornelius did not condition any portion of the inheritance on the adoption of his surname, that the choice is mine and will remain mine for as long as I live. I have not returned to teaching. The high school in West Ashley, where I taught for 15 years, held a retirement party for me in March, even though I am 41 years old, and the word retirement was applied to my departure with the gentle inaccuracy that institutions use when they do not know what else to call a person leaving early under circumstances that have appeared in the local newspaper. The students made a card. The card had drawings on it. One of the drawings was of a cargo ship with my name on the side, which a senior named Marcus had drawn after reading in the Post and Courier that I had inherited an interest in Whitfield shipping through my marriage, and that the inheritance had been the subject of considerable Charleston conversation. I keep the card on the desk in my study. The drawing of the ship is in the upper right corner. Marcus had labeled the ship Mr. Hartman's boat. The label is accurate. The label will remain accurate regardless of what the paperwork in the folder eventually says. I have begun working at Whitfield shipping 3 days a week, not in an executive office. On the floor of the warehouse on the Wando River where the company's container operations are managed, learning the business the way Beauregard's letter suggested I learn it. From the people who load the cargo, the people who pilot the tugs, the people who file the manifests. The warehouse manager, a woman named Patris Lemon, has been working at Whitfield shipping for 24 years, and she trained me for the first 2 months with the same patient firmness she trains every new employee, refusing to acknowledge the inheritance, refusing to acknowledge the newspaper coverage, refusing to acknowledge that the man she was training had married into the family that owned the company. She trained me as Wesley. I will work for her for as long as she will let me, because the training is the only credential I will earn in this business that will mean anything to the people whose work it ultimately is. Adelaide has come to dinner at our house twice. Both dinners were quiet. She has not corrected my fork. She has not corrected anyone's fork. She brings flowers from her garden, which she now tends herself, because the gardener was let go in November along with the housekeeper and most of the other staff. She sits at our table, and she eats what Genevieve has cooked, and she asks polite questions about my work at the warehouse, and the questions are real questions, not the performance of interest, and I have answered them honestly. The relationship is not restored. The relationship is being constructed slowly from materials neither of us had on hand 18 years ago. Whether the construction will yield a structure that lasts, I do not know. I am willing to find out. Thatcher I have not seen. He moved to Atlanta in January. He took a job at a consulting firm that does not pay him what Whitfield shipping would have paid him, and he sends his mother a check on the 1st of every month, and the check is small but consistent. And Adelaide told me at the second dinner that she had not expected the check, and that the existence of it has been the single most surprising development of her year. Whether the surprise constitutes growth, I cannot say. I am not the person to evaluate Thatcher's growth. Thatcher will have to do that work on his own, with someone other than me, in a city other than Charleston, over a length of time that has nothing to do with my willingness to forgive him. I went to Montreal in May. I went to meet a woman named Solange Marchand. No, that is wrong. I am thinking of a different story, a different family. The names blur in the late hours when I write these things down. I went to meet a woman named Myril Bellamy, Cornelius's younger sister, who lives in Charleston and whom I had not known existed until Holly's Pemberton mentioned her in our second meeting. Myrill is 68. She had known about me since 2018. She had wanted to reach out for 8 years and had honored her brother's wish for absence even after his death. We met at a small cafe on King Street. She brought a photograph of Cornelius at 22, the same age I was when I met Genevieve, and the resemblance between the young man in the photograph and the man in the mirror was the kind of resemblance that does not require commentary, the kind that simply is, the kind that closes a question that has been open for 41 years without ever announcing the closure. I have an aunt now. Her name is Myrill. She is teaching me to make her grandmother's gumbo. The grandmother was Margaret Bellamy of New Orleans, who married a Charleston shipping clerk in 1948 and bore 2 children, Cornelius and Myrill. And the gumbo recipe has been in the family for 4 generations and is now being transmitted to me on Saturday afternoons in Myrill's kitchen on Queen Street. If you have listened this far, then you have listened to a story about being told you do not belong, and being told that what you were told was wrong, and being told that the people who told you you did not belong were measuring you against a yardstick they did not understand and would not have applied if the information had been different. The yardstick is the problem. The yardstick is always the problem. Not the inheritance, not the surname, not the conference room, not the inch and a half between the chairs. If someone has been measuring you with a yardstick that does not see you, then this story is for you. Not because you will inherit $440 million. Most people will not. The inheritance is the decoration. The structure underneath is the yardstick. Find the people who do not use one. Marry one of them if you can. Work for one of them if you can. Be one of them if you can. The yardstick is a choice. The choice is available to you every day regardless of who is sitting at the head of the table. Subscribe if this story moved you. Share it with the person you know who has been measured wrongly. The next story is already being written. I will see you then.